Tarkov's flealess wipe has certainly divided opinion, but not because of the flea being closed. Today, we'll be examining whether BSG's no flea experiment has worked and uncovering the hidden costs that have come with removing it from the game. Most of the issues with the so-called hardcore wipe have been less to do with the flea and more about transits, boss spawns, as well as the unfairness of ref, arena, and stash space. All of these elements can be balanced and are in fact not really relevant to the closing of the flea market at all. Regardless of your feelings about the flea in general, its removal was one of the only things that pretty much everybody assumed would be a part of this wipe anyway, even before BSG released the 3 teasers with previews of what was to come. In many ways, it was the least controversial part of a hardcore wipe. But a flealess wipe, curiously, makes many of the economic systems designed in Tarkov to, well, actually function as intended, and a good example of this is barters. Barters actually work now, partially amplified by the high trader prices and low sale costs, but with the flea gone, items are valuable for what they are, rather than effectively being reduced down to small piles of cash. It's much more effective to find the inputs for a barter directly than to sell random items to the traders to generate enough cash to buy the items that they offer. This leads to more interesting looting, as Tarkov's items often have multiple uses, and a good example is the current situation with meds. After doing Therapist's first quest, you can buy a car first aid kit for 20k. Alternatively, you can barter for a Salewa, which is a straight upgrade to the car for either a paid or an emergency water ration, the latter of which can be made from other items in the hideout too. Previously, these 2 barter items on the flea market would go for something usually less but not too far off the price that Therapist sold Salewas for. With the flea gone though, selling these to the traders, you won't get anywhere close to 20k for either of them. This means that players are incentivized to look for the items and do the barter, rather than to sell items and buy things in cash, simply because the barters are much better value in almost all cases. The flip side is that they are obviously more restrictive, which is why this mechanic ends up being interesting. Cash is flexible and can buy anything offered by the traders, but it comes at a significant premium to get it in the first place. When the flea market exists, the whole economy in Tarkov ends up revolving around rubles themselves, which simplifies the game down to what sells for the most to the other players on the market. That cash can then be used to buy most of the items in the game, either on the traders or on the flea, especially as players reach the higher trader levels. Barters in turn often become either obvious no-brainers or entirely pointless, depending on the items that they ask for and the relevant prices on the flea market. And they're also difficult to balance, as the player market values the barter inputs differently depending on what is needed as a wipe progresses. Speaking of the player market, one topic of high interest right now is cheaters. Last wipe, with the temporary flea removal, it felt like the cheating situation got much better, but as soon as the flea opened, so did the floodgates, and there were cheaters everywhere. I'm not a player that experiences that many due to time zone and playstyle, but those first 2 weeks with the flea back were truly dreadful. So what about this time? Initially, things seemed pretty good. The lack of flea market makes selling rubles or items for real money quite a bit harder, as even with the various blockers and checks that BSG have put in, it's hard to police all the avenues by which money can flow from one player to another outside of a raid. And that is the purpose of the flea, after all. However, as time has gone on, it seems like there are an increasing number of players using walls in raid for the time of the wipe. Whether this is more of an effect right now, due to a lower player count, as the more casual players have potentially dropped out of PvP for PvE instead, or even just other games, it's impossible to know. But that would be more an issue with the wipe's difficulty rather than the flea market itself. I still believe that not having the flea makes life harder for cheaters, especially those selling items, but of course it does very little for those who just want to ruin other players' days, which neatly takes us to the sponsor of today's video, whose solution I would really like to see given a fair try, and if you think so too, you can register your interest to give them a hand. Before we continue, imagine playing Tarkov with no cheaters, no aimbot, no wall hacks, and no paid carries in any of your raids. Today's video is sponsored by PlaySafeID, and this is exactly what they are trying to achieve. But to make this a reality, they need your help. The problem with cheating in games is that when people are caught, they often simply buy another account and jump right back in. And the fragmented approach to anti-cheat in each game clearly isn't enough to prevent the epidemic across the industry. The difference with PlaySafe then is that it isn't actually an anti-cheat. Instead, anyone caught cheating in any of the games that it's integrated with will face penalties not on their game account, but on their PlaySafe ID. This means that if someone is caught, for example in PUBG, they'll be unable to access PlaySafe protected matchmaking in Tarkov, Apex, Call of Duty, and all the rest. For this to work though, the developers of these games need to take this solution seriously, and for that, we need you. All you have to do at this stage is go to the link in the description and register your interest. That's it. It's so easy and will take less than 10 seconds. With your vote, alongside tens of thousands of other gamers, PlaySafeID will be building the strongest possible case to change the gaming industry forever and crack down on cheating once and for all. The important thing to remember about PlaySafeID is that it's optional, it's free, and it won't be required to play any of the games that you own either now or in the future. What it does do is allow a more protected circle of matchmaking above the regular one, where you know that the chance of running into a cheater is significantly reduced. How it works is neat but simple. Every gamer can claim one single PlaySafeID for life through a special check called Zero Knowledge Verification. This means that PlaySafe can verify that you are real and that you haven't had an account before without ever having any of your documents or data. So if you want to see a world with no cheaters in online multiplayer, and I know I certainly do, then head to the link and go and register your interest to see this dream become reality. Okay, so one interesting side effect is how, with the flea market, the trader prices are basically dominated by it, outside of maybe the brand new player experience. What I mean by this is that in the flea economies previously, the prices of hideout items were so much higher than the trader prices, especially around the wipe, that it made buying things way too easy. Hoses used to go for 150 to 200k, nuts, bolts, light bulbs, and any number of items traded for multiple tens of thousands of rubles. The best strategy was typically to hoard as many items in demand as possible prior to level 15, and then dump all the excess on the flea for millions as soon as you got there. There were restrictions on both the flea and the trader gear, of course, but on those things that weren't restricted, it was basically unlimited access to anyone with some experience in this game, because the trader item prices were so low compared to the prices of those in-demand items on the flea. Now, have BSG taken it too far this wipe? Possibly. Item sell prices and buy prices are very far apart, which makes cash significantly harder to get. With the trader money spent requirement increasing dramatically via the hardcore changes, this has ended up being the main bottleneck for a large number of people. It's had a much bigger impact on the player base than at first it seemed. Before, if you were buying items at 12k, these are now 20k. If you were selling items at 12k, these are now only 8. So previously, where you would have broken even, you're now making a loss, and not a small one at that. It honestly wouldn't be crazy to say that you probably need to sell 3 times as many items as before to buy the same amount of items from the traders, because the sale and buy prices have both moved against the player. Combining this with the high requirement to spend money on the traders to level them up, this has become far too grindy for quite a lot of people, and its difficulty has been amplified by the feelings of unfairness due to the easy transfer of rubles from Arena, which now feels like a necessity unless you are a very experienced player. In my opinion, the 750k transfer should just not have been a thing for this wipe. But there is one effect that is even more powerful than the trader prices in reducing Tarkov's inflation, both in terms of money and items, which we need to consider, which is insurance. The combination of features that BSG have added for this wipe has quite successfully countered the rapid inflation that usually happens in Tarkov's economy right from day one, and players will have to work a lot harder to acquire their gear. But when they do lose it, well, what then? In a typical Tarkov wipe, insurance was an obvious decision. Items getting returned also helped alleviate some of the anxiety that playing this game induces. Even if you had a series of bad sessions, you'd probably find that some of that gear returned to you the following day. But now that BSG have made insurance cost a lot more, it's a much more complicated choice. To note, the original insurance costs have been halved a few days ago, so it's gone from being a very expensive luxury to actually being worthwhile in some cases. But there are massive benefits to having insurance basically removed from the game at an economy level, and although it sucks to lose a feature that I personally do think adds some fun into what can be considered a pretty grueling experience most of the time, it's kind of necessary if we don't want rampant inflation. To make matters worse, the effect of insurance on the in-game economy is even more extreme for items that are best in slot, which is the opposite of what you'd want to achieve here. Consider the Voodoo, for example. These enter the player economy through both the traders via barters, as well as being found in raid in various forms, such as on bosses and in weapons boxes. Once picked up, in a flea market wipe, they are generally either transferred to another player for cash or used in raid and almost certainly insured. When that player dies with the scope, it almost always ends up returning to the economy. If no one finds the body, the original player gets it back. If another player picks it up and leaves, well, they get the Voodoo instead. There are only a few fringe cases where this doesn't happen. Players going MIA by accident with it on them, causing the loadout to get deleted, an AI scav picks it up from a dead body and invalidates the insurance. Most of the time, a real player leaves the raid with it, or it gets returned to the original owner. In the menus, the only common time that they get destroyed is when a player elects to sell it to the trader rather than to move it to someone else via the flea, which is quite unlikely. This means that the number of Voodoos in circulation rapidly increases over time, with the rate of item creation greatly outweighing item destruction due to the insurance mechanic, and before you know it, they are everywhere and selling for 50k each. The same logic applies to most high-end items that don't have durability, like suppressors and night vision. A side note here is that item durability is one method to deal with this, but it's not a route that BSG appear to be going down at the moment. Even in a standard no flea wipe, this would also mostly be the case. The scope is either getting returned or being picked up by another player, and although some of them might get sold to the vendors due to the lack of a flea market, most players will still likely opt to keep it and use it for themselves due to the inherent value of the scope's function. This is why the inflation problem is in fact worst for the items that are the best in the game. The unfortunate side effect here is that both insurance and the flea market are fun for players to use. I love the flea, but I hate what it does to the game, and how it simplifies the choices down to uninteresting optimizations. Insurance also can be fun because of frauding your gear, meaning that you can take a whole enemy loadout and get your own one back later to be truly efficient. But with it in the game, there's not enough exits for items, and the game's economy bloats into endless meta gear and attachments. Some of this is also a problem with the traders. These are fine at the lower levels, but as you go up in rank, inevitably more and more stuff is available without having to go into raid. We'll have to see how it pans out this time, but usually you can make most of a meta loadout without even touching the flea because level 4 traders are very powerful. Now, with the cash changes and no flea, that has dealt with it in some ways. You get access to more powerful things, but with barters, you still have to find a lot of that stuff to go and do them rather than circumventing it by buying them through the flea. And those that are in cash are quite expensive. For example, the mini monster being 180,000 rubles on mechanic 3, which is quite off-putting. But the traders still probably make the gap between the top and the bottom too large at level 4. And especially if people start playing partway through a wipe. The flea itself was kind of a balancing feature for this, as it gave people entering halfway through a little way to boost up into some sensible kits and fast track the progression to catch up a bit. Prices of that kind of intermediate second tier early stuff are generally lower at that time, like M855 ammo. This time, however, the hurdles are very static, being based around the trader's requirements and inventory specifically, which is just as tough for those starting on day 60 as those starting on day 1. This certainly isn't all bad. BSG have definitely done a good job of restricting some things on max traders over time, but I'm still of the opinion that the absolute best in slot item of each category should be found in raid in some way. One other big element to having the flea removed is the problems with keys. Keys are an intrinsic part of Tarkov's progression, and in fairness, this is working relatively well this wipe because of the hard spawns that have been added for a decent number of the early keys. If you check on the wiki, there is now often a new section specifically for this wipe that gives some of the fixed spawns for these, allowing you to search for them more effectively than just random drops in filing cabinets or jackets, which can be very tiresome if you get unlucky. Dorms 114 is the first really annoying one that springs to mind for Therapist, and basically keys that block questlines either need A, super high drop rates, like that one wipe where 206 key spawned at least 2 to 3 times a raid, or B, they need specific spawns with a decent chance to find them, like we have now for some of them, or C, they should have a barter on the traders. The great thing about having a barter is that so long as the input is common enough, you can get a small but incremental progression using the secure container, giving you an effectively guaranteed way to get it eventually, just in case you don't find it naturally. There are other ways to do it, such as other quests giving the keys on a different trader branch, but with these 3 systems, you can do away with the need for the flea market for keys. So overall, yes, I do believe that Tarkov is better with no flea, and especially at the start of a wipe because of how it allows the other mechanics to actually work as intended. It would be a shame to get rid of it completely, so perhaps it could open up for the final section of a wipe, maybe some kind of community event that opens it up 3 months in, something along those lines. But broadly speaking, the game is better off without it. So do remember to go and register your interest for PlaySafeID. Otherwise, as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.